increase in acidification in that topsoil. What that means is that the need to monitor that soil pH and to take appropriate corrective actions through the use of liming actually becomes an important aspect of nutrient management in those systems. So as long as you recognise the potential problems, they are quite manageable. And it's really a matter of monitoring the soil, monitoring the plants to actually keep tabs on what's happening over the years. Okay, I'd like to talk a little bit about some of the interactions which occur with micronutrients. And we often think about micronutrient deficiencies as affecting all plants and all varieties equally. But that's not the case. You actually have quite significant variation in the tolerances of different species and varieties within a species to the levels of micronutrients in the soil. So here's these are trials which were actually done by the faba bean breeder down in the southeast of South Australia on a heavy grey soil which becomes waterlogged during winter. And here you can see the faba beans in the front, and they had a range of other legumes including peas, chickpeas, lentils and vetch, and that yellowness is iron deficiency. So the faba beans are quite tolerant of iron deficiency, but these other legumes are actually quite sensitive. But even within a species, here we have two varieties of peas. That variety is quite green, quite capable of, or quite tolerant of iron deficiency. That one has actually gone yellow. So there is genetic variation not only between species, but also between varieties within the species. So when we're talking about micronutrient deficiencies, often we need to consider what variety or what species we're growing, because you will get different sensitivities to given micronutrients. Here's another example. Here we have durum wheat, bread wheat and barley. They were grown with a low level of zinc or with adequate zinc, and basically you can see the durum wheat has died through zinc deficiency. The bread wheat has shown a reduction in growth, but it's still a significant reduction in yield, and this barley is actually quite happily growing under zinc deficiency. So generally what you find amongst the cereals, durum wheat is the most sensitive of the crops to zinc deficiency, bread wheat is moderately tolerant, barley and rye are actually quite tolerant to zinc deficiency. But even within each of those species you can get significant variation. So in this bottom here we have a range of different wheat varieties grown at the same level of zinc, which is low in the soil, and you can see there are some wheat varieties which are showing quite severe reductions in growth, and there are others which are actually quite tolerant. So there are considerable levels of genetic variation in tolerance to some of these soil micronutrient stresses. And you can demonstrate the same types of things with copper deficiency and also with manganese deficiency. What we find is that many of the varieties of wheat and barley which have done well in regions where these micronutrient problems are pervasive are generally or are more likely to show a high degree of efficiency. So the breeders, by selecting for yield in these conditions, have unknowingly also selected for zinc deficiency or tolerance to zinc deficiency. And when you think about it, this seems to be logical, that if a variety, if the availability of zinc is a limiting factor, the varieties which are going to yield better are the ones which are going to be able to take that nutrient out of the soil much better. I'm sure you're all aware of some of the potential dangers of SU herbicides, and this was quite in terms of nutrient uptake, and this was a dramatic example last year. Here we have a durum wheat trial which was sprayed with Hussar, and this is the sprayed strip, and this is the unsprayed strip here. And essentially we've got significant amounts of, or significant reduction in growth, and that was associated with a significant reduction in the uptake of zinc. So there are circumstances where the use of herbicides can actually impair the uptake of micronutrients. The SU herbicides, or the effect of the SU herbicides, is well documented, and some of the Group A herbicides can also have that impact. This is probably a severe case because we have a crop, durum wheat, which is actually quite sensitive to zinc deficiency, and so the effect is actually quite dramatic in this case. I've put this in really just out of a matter of interest, really. And in the past 5 years or so, there's been a lot of work out of Europe and Brazil and parts of North America which have looked at the effect of glyphosate on the uptake of micronutrients. And this work started actually looking at the effect of spray drift in orchards and the effect on spray drift on the nutrition of fruit trees. But then they also started to look at the effect of Roundup or glyphosate on the uptake of micronutrients in Roundup-ready soybeans. And what they often find is that with the application of Roundup, you do get a reduction in the uptake of some of the micronutrients, but the effect doesn't necessarily translate into a reduction in yield or growth. And the reason for being this, if you look at these manganese concentrations, they're actually very high. The critical levels are way down here, so there's no way that that's going to be deficient in the crop. And similarly, we also see that although we're getting a reduction in copper uptake, it's certainly still well above the critical level. What this work has shown is there's been a lot of, you can probably realise that this is a fairly contentious issue, and there's been a degree of debate about some of these data. But what the results show is that the glyphosate-resistant gene itself doesn't actually impair micronutrient uptake. So there's been some argument that glyphosate resistance actually has a negative effect on the uptake of nutrients. That's not really the case. It's really just a genetic effect, which you see amongst any group of varieties. But what you often do find is that the glyphosate can actually reduce the uptake of micronutrients in plants. So just keep that in the back of your mind. The final one that I just want to mention is the interaction between micronutrients and disease. Copper and zinc and manganese, one of their physiological roles in plants is to provide protection against some of the pathogens which infect plants. And so what can happen is that if the plant doesn't have an adequate supply of those micronutrients, their susceptibility to disease can actually be greater. So here's two examples again with zinc. Here we have crown rot in wheat, and you can see that as you improve the level of zinc supply to the plant, the zinc concentration increases and the level of infection declines. This is rhizoctonia in wheat in a field trial in the Mallee, and again you can see that as the amount of zinc applied to the crop increased, the level of infection declined. It's important to realise that although micronutrients can provide a beneficial role in terms of disease protection, they're not a silver bullet. You'll never completely eliminate the diseases through the micronutrients. And in a number of experiments, or in a few experiments where they actually included a fungicide treatment as a comparison, the effect of the micronutrient or the nutrient on the disease never quite matches the effect of the fungicide. So the nutritional level of the plant certainly can have